Welcome to the ACHR Newsroom. I'm Leanne Dehan, web editor for the ACHR News, and here's a recap of the industry's latest headlines. Last December, Congress passed the American Innovation in Manufacturing Act, which gave the EPA the authority to phase down HFCs to 15% of their baseline levels by 2036. Since then, the HVACR industry has been waiting to find out how the AIM Act is going to be implemented. The EPA recently delivered its final rule, which set HFC production and consumption baselines and outlined the phase-down schedule. They also released the 2022 allowances for companies that produce or import HFCs in the U.S. They announced that they had granted multiple petitions that look to further restrict the use of HFCs in air conditioning and refrigeration equipment. While most in the HVACR industry were glad that the EPA released the information on time, the final rule raised some concerns. Refrigerant manufacturers were surprised that the transfer tax was bumped to 5% from a maximum of 1%. The rule also doesn't address imported products containing HFCs, which could represent as much as 10% of the baseline consumption. And lastly, the EPA has called for a ban on disposable refrigerant cylinders starting in 2025, which experts believe will be expensive and troublesome for the whole industry. The industry is likely to see further effects of the EPA's final rule in the near future because of the various petitions the EPA has granted. These petition grants don't finalize regulations, but if they're accepted as is, the EPA would essentially follow California's phase-down regulations, which require a 750 global warming potential limit for new air conditioning equipment by 2025. The major HVAC manufacturers saw higher sales and revenues in the third quarter thanks to continued strong demand and the effects of several price hikes. Margins were another matter. Rising expenses for materials and parts, along with higher labor costs, all had an impact. For example, Lennox International reported record third-quarter revenue of $1.06 billion, but the company took hits of approximately $75 million to revenue and $25 million to operating profit from supply chain issues. This was all despite 4 price increases this year. Trane Technologies also reported record revenue in the third quarter, but margins declined by more than 50 basis points. Contractors have been able to absorb these price increases to an extent thanks to strong demand from customers. The shift to work from home and government stimulus boosted this demand much higher than expected when the pandemic started. That demand continued through the third quarter and should remain partially because of the supply shortage, but manufacturers are seeing signs of moderation. Carrier Global CEO David Gitlin said new home builders delayed several projects due to supply constraints in some materials and supplies. He added that there's been a year-over-year decline in residential equipment demand, although it's hard to compare this year's performance to 2020. Over the last few years, artificial intelligence has risen in popularity. AI is now making its way into the commercial refrigeration market. Coming in a little late, the delay is due to the many control systems food retailers already have in place. They all collect and process data differently, which makes it difficult to ensure accuracy and consistency. In addition, many of these systems are proprietary and vendors might not be willing to share their data with others. Despite this, the pace of AI development in commercial refrigeration is beginning to accelerate. Most manufacturers are now advancing their equipment control intelligence. They're also figuring out how to leverage AI to provide value for their own business and for their customers. Danfoss's Michael Kellerman says, fundamentally, we're talking about gathering data from the equipment as well as external data sources, artificially analyzing the data, and then commanding the equipment to behave in a certain way. He added that finding value for customers can be a challenge because the most innovative or exciting AI case might not be the most practical for a food retailer. The coronavirus pandemic increased consumer awareness of indoor air quality to its highest level. Average people became much more concerned about ventilation and filtration, and that's been an advantage for the HVAC industry. But the question is now, will this elevated interest in indoor air quality continue after the pandemic ends? Easy Breathe owner Andre LaCroix says ventilation has become a buzzword for people and they've been doing their own research. He explained that this became bigger during the pandemic because people started spending more time in their homes than in offices and schools. The three main areas of approaching indoor air quality are filtration, ventilation, and humidity. And while consumers know they want a solution, they might not know which one to choose for their situation. HVAC contractors are usually the main source of information for indoor air quality, which is why it's important for them to stay on top of which products are available to best suit their customers' needs. For more information on these stories and many more, you can visit achrnews.com. I'm Leanne Dehan. Thank you for watching.